Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now today we're on location in the county of Monmouthshire in South Wales, land of my fathers. But we're not just visiting one ruin today. We'll be exploring 3 medieval castles, a defensive triangle of power that's guarded these borderlands for more than 800 years. So stick with me, because as we move from one castle to the next, you'll start to notice hidden clues in the stonework, clues that help us piece together how these fortresses once looked and how they really functioned back in the 13th and 14th centuries. But this is part of what's called the 3 castles. You see, under King Stephen, 1135, he brought in a lordship that had 3 castles, White Castle, Skenfrith and Grosmont. And these were here to keep this road from Wales through to Hereford safe. There's only 5 miles in between each of the castles. They form a bit of a triangle, and people love to do the 3 castle walks. So the first on our list is Grosmont Castle. It's incredible actually when you think where we are. We're in a tiny little village high up on a hill in South Wales, but it's Hubert de Burgh. 1219, he'd already had the castle once, lost it. He'd exchanged ownerships between the king and him and other people, but eventually, 1219, he manages to complete a stone great hall, stone curtain walls, and these absolute incredible flanking towers. Now, I'll have a closer look at these mural towers, they're called. They jut out, and they are there literally, if you can see just in the join of the wall, you can see an arrow slit. And that's the idea. Anybody who managed to get down the ditch, you are covered from so many different portals, so many different arrow slits. One thing I love about this place, when I used to bring the kids here, was to show them how the drawbridge works. And it's a bit of a challenge for me because I haven't been here for years, so we're going to go across the wooden bridge and see if I can find the evidence of the drawbridge. So we're standing at the entrance to what would have been a 2-storey magnificent gatehouse. It's all gone. The stone's been quarried, this has been a ruin for years. But you imagine the great big winding and weights that make this actually rise up, and then there's a stop, bang, about here. And if you look down, you can see where the counterweights for this mighty drawbridge would have swung down as it slammed shut against the enemy. You can see the space there. So when one of the enormous drawbridges opened up, that's where it literally folded down into the gatehouse. Now, right at the bottom was often where they put their prisoners to rot. But there's an extra thing with this gatehouse. As you approach, so that's the first drawbridge, but you're still not in. There's a second drawbridge here for the inner gatehouse. It's only a small one, so you've got the giant one at the front, then you've got a smaller one here, and you can see it has its own drawbridge pit, a lot smaller than that great drawbridge there. So it means you've got to get across the great big drawbridge, smash it down, bring it down, then charge forward. But hang on, there's another gap with the drawbridge shut, and don't forget they had big doors behind them. So this is a series of drawbridges, and that's kind of a reflection, because if I remember correctly, I don't think this place was ever captured. I know there was a king's army outside, and I know that there was an attack during the revolt of Owain Glyndŵr, but apparently it failed. But this was not a great castle. This was a luxurious place to live. Very small, very compact. And what we're going to do, we're going to go inside and have a look around. So it's an interesting thing. As these castles declined, the owners who owned the ruins, they would put it up for quarry. So you could say, well, I fancy building a house in Grosmont village. Can I have X amount of stone? Yeah, you pay, you come up with your barrows and your wagons, and you take the facing stone. But if you then come across a nice window or a doorway, the edges are always a contrasting stone, a different kind of stone, and they're often carved. So you'll notice one of the first things to go in any castle ruin are the doorways and the windows, because people have paid their money and they've quarried the doors and windows, as well as, of course, the facing stone. In Grosmont, there's another interesting little thing. There's loads of them, but this one is, we're in the gatehouse, right? The gatehouse complex. Really important. You've seen where the drawbridges were. But as you come here, there's a doorway that goes onto the top of the ditch, a sally port. Now, you imagine the enemy is trying to get up the top there, so you could have soldiers could come out and they could engage them, they could fight them. This would have been, for sure, a fortified doorway. The film Lord of the Rings, when you see a certain Aragorn and a certain dwarf, they come out of a side gate, Helm's Deep is it, and then they swing around and fight the enemy. It's a sally port, has to be done. But I don't think there'd have been an Aragorn here. Probably a Jim Smith or something. I forgot all about this. Look at this. This is the original cobbled pathway to the courtyard, hammered in stone and then covered in with all different kinds of grit and mortar. And it's still here. It's amazing. So we're going to go and take a look where the Great Hall used to be. It was this side of the castle was this beautiful stone-built Great Hall. But as we go in, you don't end up in the Great Hall. These are storerooms. We're downstairs. The Lord of the Manor had his Great Hall above us. In fact, over there is a fireplace at ground level. That must have been a kitchen. Then above this must have been the Great Hall, because if you look over yonder, that enormous gouge out of there, then you can see what's left of the chimney. That was the Great Hall fireplace. And there would have been another fireplace at this end. You can just about see where the chimney went, but the whole fireplace has been taken out. What you had above here was living accommodation. So there's the Great Hall. This is the living accommodation. If you look at the illustration here, you can see that there's an external staircase that goes up from the courtyard into the Great Hall on the first level. If you go diagonal across to the right-hand corner, it's believed there was a spiral staircase in the corner tower just to the right of the main fireplace in the hall. This will give you access to the upper floor as well as the battlements. And then across the Great Hall, you can see there's an enormous wooden screen. And this gives access to the private chambers where the noble lord would have slept. Only his servants and he and his family would have access to that. So this puts flesh on the bones. Unfortunately now, though, it's just a shell and the tower has completely disappeared. So this is one of those castles where, okay, we've got the stores, we've got the kitchens, the great halls, a beautiful fireplace that would have been there, the accommodation here, and then it changed. They built more luxurious accommodation, and the way you can tell it was luxurious is something that is quite rare. I'll show it to you. So next we're going to go through that doorway there, over yonder. That's going to take us out of the courtyard of the castle into an accommodation building that was built on the back of the castle, but it includes a mural tower, one of those flanking towers. So you now have improvements to the castle. The man in charge, the earl or whoever it is, wants to have his privacy, and his privacy is behind those walls. Let's have a look. So we're entering a small room here, but it must have been a lovely room because it has a window and a window seat that looks into the courtyard of the castle. But if you look up at yonder there, you can see the underneath of the stairs that used to be on that side of the hall. So here you have a thick wall, defensive. I presume there would have been arrow slits. But it's that beautiful chimney up there. I'm going to have to climb the wall, so I've got to be very careful because I don't want to fall to me death. So, watch this. So here we are, we're on the back of the castle. We're in this accommodation range, this block. This circular piece here used to be part of a mural tower, a fighting tower on the back of the castle. But as the castle developed and they built the accommodation block, right from over there, the castle accommodation block incorporates this, continues past and this becomes defunct as a tower. However, I've noticed at the bottom there is a drain. So although there are no signs to tell me, I reckon this, the cellar part of the tower, became a cesspit. And that will make sense when you look at some of the other evidence around here. This accommodation block is dominated by this fabulous 14th century octagonal chimney. It's a bit wow. And here is the fireplace that's underneath that chimney. And it's virtually, well, the chimney is complete, the fireplace has gone. And there's a reason behind the fireplace has gone. We're missing an enormous part of this building. So there's a fireplace at the bottom here where you have that enormous bird's nest. But if you look up above, there was another fireplace in the room above. You know, when you come to these places, you've got to regard them as a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. Put the pieces back together. When I came this side to look at these fireplaces, I didn't know there were two. And then I realised, well, how do you get into the rooms? But of course, there's a doorway from the accommodation at the Great Hall. So there would have been wooden flooring in here. That's something I often miss in these places. You can see where the stonework went. But of course, you can't see where the floors used to be, especially when there is so much of the castle missing. And this being the outside wall of the castle, this is where your latrines, your garderobes, are likely to have been located, just above the cesspit, into which they would empty and then drain into the ditch, ready for collection by the gong farmer. Right, we're going to leave the accommodation now and we're going to go into the courtyard and explore some more of the castle. So, I'm coming up from the gatehouse out of the courtyard here into what looks at the first time just as a defensive tower. However, the archway that used to be here. Why on earth would you have such a grand archway in a defensive tower? You don't realise it until you get in and you start to put this castle back together. So, yes, of course you have your arrow slits. On this floor there are 1, 2, 3. This is that flanking tower, so you've got them tight up against the wall. But look at the putlugs, the holes for the joists, they go across there. This is a heavy floor here, so it can take a lot of weight. Then if you come up just above the arrow slit, you can just about see the remains of where the other floor joists used to be. And then you go further up, the tower changes shape inside. So above us, you have a fireplace. Then even higher, you have a vaulted ceiling that used to be there. You can just about see where the joists used to sit. So this isn't just a fighting tower. Above the army bit is accommodation. Those are proper windows, they're not arrow slits. So my question was, all right then, you've got those lovely windows, that lovely archway, you've got the entrance, it's accommodation. How'd you get up there? You know, I looked at these stairways here, then I realised they've been cut through. This is to let the tourists up onto the battlements. We'll have a look at those in a wee while. When you turn and look at this isn't just an empty space. This is a spiral staircase, and I'll show you how it works. You come in, your stairs are actually here, and you can just about retrace them all the way round until you have the spiral above me head. That's just brilliant. And you wouldn't realise it, would you, until you turn around and had a look. So the way the battlements worked is quite ingenious. They were all interconnected. They gave you 360-degree access to the top of the castle. The way you got to the battlements was up through one of the towers using the spiral staircase or through the gatehouse. If one of the battlements was breached and the enemy were there, you could simply close off that section by shutting the doors in the towers. Then, because all of these towers were actually higher than the battlements, your crossbowmen or longbowmen could shoot down onto the enemy who'd breached that section. So what we have here is one of the mural towers. Looks like there was some kind of an arrow slit or window pointing in that direction. And when you look back, just how high that accommodation tower really was. And then, of course, when you look out from the battlements, well, as a longbowman, I can tell you, I'd create havoc from here. Just try to imagine as we follow these walls around, rebuild the battlements and follow them as they go around the new accommodation block, around the outside of the Great Hall, across the fortified gatehouse, through the other mural towers, and back to this one. It shows just how fast the garrison could respond to an attack on any approach to the castle. But before the enemy could get to this castle, of course, they had to navigate that ditch. So there you have Grosmont Castle. Once a luxurious home and fortress, now an absolute ruin. But it still holds echoes of its medieval past. The border wars between England and Wales, its connection with Owain Glyndŵr. Grosmont, for sure, has seen centuries of history unfold. Now next up, we're at Skenfrith Castle. Now this was built between 1219 and 1232 by Hubert de Burgh. This is one of those castles that guarded the route from South Wales right the way through to Hereford. So this castle here, Skenfrith Castle, is an important piece in the jigsaw of the history of Wales. So let us explore. One of the problems you've got when you actually visit Skenfrith Castle is the undulations in the ground here. What happened 1954, the archaeologists came in, they did great excavations, they found the floor plan of the castle, which was brilliant. However, some of the spoil they took out of the rooms had been put in there in the medieval times, because this castle damp, as I've read, was prone to flooding because of the River Monnow, which actually flows just over here on the tree line. Now this was the gatehouse, and this was a great big gatehouse, drawbridge, portcullises, the whole battlements. You know, what you would think a medieval castle gatehouse looks like. And this great drawbridge went across the deep, wide moat, which has all been filled in. So you would come in through here, and it would be a courtyard. There were buildings on either side, and then just there. Look at that. The keep. This is a circular keep. It's in the main courtyard, just slightly to one end of the castle. But as you look around at these walls, in fact, there was a defensive tower just in the middle of that battlement there. You can see the remains of the window. Well, if you go above that, add another 6 foot, and that'll give you the height of the battlements. And they were capped with proper battlements, the hoardings, the whole business. This was your archetypal medieval castle. The layout of Skenfrith, it was rectangular in shape, and it was quite low lying with the River Monnow to the east and the large moat surrounding it. It had a gatehouse to the north and 4 round towers, one in each corner, with a deep circular basement and 2 floors above with the arrow loops for defence. Domestic and accommodation ranges lined the inside curtain wall. Some were made of brick, some of timber, and of course that fabulous round keep in the centre. These were common in the early 13th century. You can read this castle actually. You look at these foundation stones all the way around. They're mirrored over there. This is the gatehouse. But if you come over here, you can see where local people have actually quarried the stone to build their houses. Don't forget, this was a ruin for a very, very long time. In fact, it had gone into decline from the 1600s. So all of this now is in somebody's house. But if you look close, you can see what I've been told was not so much cement, more of a concrete, but you can feel it. It is cement mixed with grit. Now this is the original stuff. It's all over the place. Maybe some repairs have been done, but I see this in castles all over the country. So what I've learnt is we're actually on the site of the chapel. Now I know the chapel was often close to the quarters of the lord of the manor, the range I call them, and the remains of them are all along here. So let's have a look. You've got to use your imagination. Now if you remember, I told you about the castle flooding and the way some of the rooms had been filled with gravel so that they could then put a new floor on it, and then that's all been tipped out. So we're way high. If you look, this was the medieval ranges. There is a doorway just here. This was the medieval entrance. So we should be down there. Let me take a walk down, see what we can find. So remember, I'm actually going down to the level of the ground in the medieval times. You're standing on spoil, tons of it. When you come through here, it's just a doorway, it's just an archway. But actually pause for a moment. Look at the size of this. So the door hangs on this post. There would have been another, in fact, there it is. So even where we are, we're above ground level. Now, there's a mason mark here, but I think this is a replacement piece of stone. But as you come around, it reveals how important this doorway actually was. So you have a put-lug. Now this goes right the way back, the full width of the doorway, at least, with some to spare. So you slide that along. Here was the original reception. Bang, in it goes, locks the door shut. These enormous hinges here, wonderful, but just behind it is a mason's mark. And I love this. This is a piece of repair work. You know, we don't really know exactly what these rooms were. This is probably accommodation. Next door, the hall. But if you look, there's a window. So it's not quite an arrow slit, but it's narrow enough to be defended. Then you have these. Now this has been filled in at the top, and I know exactly what these are for. These are the wooden uprights, so that you have that lovely vaulted ceiling would have been going across here. A capital post, one that sticks right up to the apex of the roof. It would have looked lovely because it would have been open to the beams, because there's no fireplace in here. So there would have been braziers to heat the place. So the smoke will go up into the rafters and find its own way out. Now interestingly with this place, it's a rectangular castle. There was a round tower in each corner as well as the round keep. But I don't know if you've noticed, what a big chunk missing. An entire tower has actually been demolished, used for quarry, build somebody else's house. It's interesting because people say to me, well, that is so sad, why didn't they leave it alone? People have to live, and this literally became a quarry like so many other castles. This isn't a result of the Civil War, this is people getting on with their lives. Right, we're just going down into what I think was the Great Hall. High status doorway there, so it's a big clue. Let's go and have a look. Oh, by the way, I think I've discovered where some of the stone from the castle actually went. It's been re-employed. That's not so bad. So, once again, massive door. There are no hinges here, no put-lugs, so I've got to assume it's all been filled in over the centuries. But the remains of what I think is a fireplace here. Now, I thought this was a fireplace. You know, when you come into these places, there's always an anomaly, something that doesn't quite make sense. You come into the hall, there's a fireplace on your left. Mind you, I don't like the fireplace just being there. Do you know what I mean? A fireplace right next to the door, it just doesn't add up. In fact, it's thought that this was originally a door, but what happened was they began to build it, but changed their minds, and partway through, they built a smaller doorway just to the right of it instead. Now, you can see there are some wooden put-lugs at the far end of the hallway there. So these put-lugs, that tells me there was some wooden structure there. Was that part of the canopy or the raised platform, the dais where the noble lord sat? Now that makes sense to me, because here there has to have been a fireplace. Come and have a look at this. First of all, they've exposed these finials here, finely carved. Look at the shape of the stonework going down. Another finial this side. finely carved. So this fireplace has been filled in. But if you look behind, you can actually see the slope where the chimney used to draw smoke up and out of the room, unlike the central brazier that may have been next door. So we're still in the hall, and there's an intriguing bit of evidence here. So if we went back to the medieval times, if this is the windowsill, then I would literally be looking out of a window like this, yeah? But as you can see, it's been filled in the old days and then remade. So I would have to be a little bit higher to look out of the window. So this shows you that because of the flooding, they did fill these rooms full of rubble and all of this shale kind of stuff that they then emptied out to have a look at the plans of the rooms. So originally we're further down, then later on we're further up. It's intriguing, isn't it? I love the detective work. So we're just leaving the hall, the Great Hall if you like, when I noticed this doorway, it's got a putlug here and these really lovely shaped door reveals here. They're absolutely lovely, and you can see where there is an iron hinge just at the bottom, and then of course your putlug. So this is the smaller doorway that was built to lead either to a room next door or possibly up some stairs to an upper floor, maybe to a new great hall that doesn't flood. We're going into the room next door. Let's have a see, because they've left it on a different level. So we're in the room next to the Great Hall over there, or the hall. But if you look, it's on a totally different level. So this is the conundrum. This is the what if. What if then, because of all of the flooding, they filled all of those rooms up to this height? And then you put in a nice kitchen hearth there for the fire. You have a drain over here, which points to it being a domestic kind of range. And as I suggested, a new great hall just across there. So on top of the original early medieval, they built up to avoid the flooding. We're going to leave all of these rooms now. We're going to go through this door. There's another interesting feature here. It's believed this is the remains of a tank, a reservoir for storing water. Because the water table was so high back then, there wasn't any need for a well. So they stored water in here. Brilliant, eh? We're going to go up to the corner and I'll show you something. Now we're at the southwest tower. This is the only tower you can actually look into. Two of the towers are missing. One of them's bricked up, and this one you can see. It reveals that there was, let's call it a basement, a cellar, or was it a dungeon? Is this where there was a wooden floor and they just lifted a trap door, and if you were a prisoner, in you went? And interestingly, there's no evidence in here of a stone staircase. So you have the ground floor, then you have the first floor, and then a second floor above, and then way up higher you have the battlements. But there's a little interesting thing. I know all of the arrow slits are gone, right? But there is a little drain just over yonder on the wall, and it reminds me of something. Is that a poop chute? Was there above us a garderobe, and the men right at the top there had access to a toilet? So was it a cesspit? Was it a cellar? Or was it a dungeon? This is what I love about these places. When they're so far removed from their original shapes, you've got to try and piece the puzzle back together yourself. Have some fun. Try and figure out, hey, what used to be here? We're going to go over to the tower now, this beautiful circular tower you can see. But before we go in, you'll notice what I'd say is on the first floor there, you have an arrow slit just below that grand window. And you also have a giant dripstone going all the way around. And then the building itself was skirted, it flared out. So if you're shooting any rocks at it and things like that, you've got that extra defense at the bottom. So let's go and have a look. So here we are, we're going to go into the keep, this lovely circular keep. We're going to go through that door, but that isn't the original door. That's the door up there. So you imagine you can't get in except through that door. You could have steps coming down, have a wooden platform in front of it, the whole lot made of wood. So when the time of a siege, if you have to retreat into the keep, you make sure you knock that down. They can't get in. And another thing about this keep, it's far taller than any of the walls around here. So if you're a crossbowman or even a longbowman, you've got a 2-tier arc of shot. So men could be shooting you from the top of this keep right the way across, no problems at all. The problem you've got as an attacker is shooting back, because all of these would have had their hoardings, their wooden fighting balconies all the way around. You can't see the men inside here, but they can see you. Let's go in. So here we are in the middle of the circular keep. It's lovely. We have a nice example of an arrow loop here. But what I find interesting is the level of the rooms. If you look down, you can see there's a rim. I presume there was an enormous storeroom, or even broken up into different rooms. But there's something I've just noticed. As you go above, you can see the put-lugs where the great beams went across for the room upstairs. But you can just see there a corbel, a carved stone piece that would have taken some form of arch that would have gone across to support the ceiling of the room upstairs. And then above it, right the way up there, you can see there is another one, a support, and you've got the line of the floor upstairs. And right up there is an enormous fireplace, which shows you how big the rooms were upstairs. Now on top of that, put another floor, put a roof, and we have it complete. Now there is something missing here. I don't know if you've spotted it yourselves, but I can't find a spiral staircase. I can't see the evidence of it. So there must have been wooden structures in here. Simply a wooden staircase, right? Gets you from one room to the other. For the soldiers, it may be nothing more than a ladder. But of course, for the gentlefolk, it would have been a staircase. So I've already shown you the tower in the west corner. That's the east corner. And as you can see, the tower has pretty much gone, but there's evidence that there was a range of rooms going all the way along here. I understand them to have been the kitchen, and they go all the way. There you have your tower that would have been at the east front of the castle. But there is evidence that tells you what some of these rooms would have been. There's a drain through there. And is this the remains of a bread oven I see? Let's go down and have a look. It's something you can always see when there's a domestic range, a kitchen range of some kind, is the drains that go through the walls. But this circular brickwork here, this is the bakery, this is the baker's oven. Very often they had the oven for the bread. On top of it, they would have had another one for the pies. There were so many different ways that these worked. And I've actually fired one up many years ago in Chepstow. We got the bread oven going and we baked a loaf of bread. What was interesting is you could only eat half of it because the other half was black. Apparently, I didn't turn the loaf enough. These actually worked. How wonderful. But there's another piece of evidence as to this being the domestic range. So I'm coming down to the original level of the castle. Here we go. I am in the castle ovens. A circular building, stone built, went all the way up. Then it had a funnel roof, a round roof. Smoke went out through the chimney at the top, and the whole community would have used it. They'd have a main oven for cooking their meat, you know, roasted boar and deer and such. And the oven above would be used to bake bread and the most delicious pies. Pretty much the equivalent of a modern double oven today. But of course, much bigger. Can you imagine it all on here? It'd be quite fantastic. These are the lovely things about this castle, but this particular one has an extra piece of magic which I love, and I'm going to show you that just before we leave, so follow me. This is the water gate. let's explore. As you can see, I don't fit. So let's dig a bit of this out and let's go through the castle wall itself. There are put lugs. There would have been a mighty door here. But if I then stepped all those hundreds of years ago, I would drown because I'm now in the River Monnow. On this side of the castle here, it wasn't a moat. The river literally came up to the walls. You open the doors, there would maybe a little wooden jetty here because this is a way of getting goods to and from Monmouth. This river was deep enough to have been navigable. So you have to imagine, all of this would not be here. The river has receded, it's got shallower, it's over there. And that really tells you everything about Skenfrith, a castle shaped as much by water as by war. But Skenfrith was never meant to stand alone. It was just one piece of a much larger defensive puzzle. So now, let's head up the valley and visit the strongest fortress of them all. So here we are, the last castle in our three castles tour. This is White Castle. And I've read that out of the three castles, this is the best preserved. So let's have a look at what's still standing of this magnificent fortress. White Castle was originally established by the Normans in the late 11th century. It was likely commissioned by William Fitz-Osborne, a key ally of William the Conqueror. Later in the 13th century, a powerful royal official, Hubert de Burgh, improved the castle, adding curtain walls to the outer bailey as well as the great towers, pretty much as you see the outline of the castle today. So what we have is the gatehouse to the outer bailey, so you could call this the outer gatehouse. Now it's got a bailey built on the only piece of flat land outside of the castle, except for what's behind us, because there used to be an other bailey just behind us here. This was to house the tents, that kind of thing, for the armies that had to gather here to defend this area from the Welsh when they were on their uprisings. So before we go into the outer bailey, you see it's defended by a ditch. Now this would have been a lot deeper than it is now. Corner round towers, then a curtain wall, all that's been removed, it's been quarried, and now we would go into the gatehouse. And of course, there would have been the obligatory drawbridge. And there is still evidence here, as you come across. There's the stone piers where the drawbridge closed onto. So the drawbridge would actually close down and rest on that pier just there, that stone pier. But when it was raised, you can actually see just here, this is the extent of the gap they would have to come across. And the drawbridge, as it comes up, the tail end of it would actually go into the sump, into this great big gap underneath, which you can see. And it is quite deep. You can see how far it extends all the way back to just here. So when the drawbridge pivots, it comes up and then is dropped into the enormous pit just there. So amazingly, once the drawbridge was actually closed against the enemy, you have the gap there that they've got to get across. But if they smashed through the drawbridge, if ever they could do such a terrible thing, there is the pit here that they've got to get across as well. And then just behind it, you have a groove here and a groove there. That is for the portcullis. And behind the portcullis, there would have been the castle doors. And here is your massive putlug hole, where they ram from the other side this great big wooden beam that locks in on this side. So, front door, and we're not even anywhere near the castle. And the rest of this building, you've got a bit of a guard room. You've got an arrow slit looking down into the ditch. So this is quite a defensive piece. And there was rooms upstairs as well, because you've got the windings and everything for the portcullis and for the drawbridges. But there's an extra piece to this. Let me show you. There was another door here. I can't find any evidence for there was another portcullis, but what kind of throws me a little bit. The door is the wrong way around. As you can see, the door jamb is on the wrong side, and so is the put-lug, that great big hole there to push the beam through. It locks the door from this side, from inside the gatehouse. So hang on a second, I've got it. This could seal, this gatehouse could be sealed against people coming that way, and if they got over the walls, coming in this way, because the door jamb is there and the put-lug is on the back of it. So that's an interesting point, isn't it? You can lock the door against the people who are attacking you from behind. Hey, I like this place. And there you have the stairs going up. The up no longer exists. So we're in the outer bailey now. We've got through the gatehouse. There were buildings all the way along there. You know, wooden buildings, that kind of thing. There would have also been tents, marquees in here when there was a visiting army. But there is something that I've not seen anywhere else with regards to the arrow slits. And I'm going to walk you over to the corner here and have a look at one of the arrow slits from the inside. So this is one of your round towers, obviously a lot higher, and there would have been a wooden back on it. So we go in the door. We're in the cellar part, but if you come up, have a look at the arrow slits. Just see if you can spot what's different about them. They are uneven. Instead of there being an arrow cross, one left side is higher than the right side, and it's slightly bigger as well. We have a much better example of the off-centered arrow slit here. Now, I believe that the reason of that shape is you can get two men to shoot out of it at the same time. It also gives you a better angle to shoot from. But if you know any different, please get in touch, let me know, because every day is a school day, isn't it? But that's what I reckon. They're off-centered so that two different men could actually shoot through them, which is important in the day of the crossbow. These are for crossbows, really, not for longbows. You know, White Castle, it really is your archetypal medieval castle, isn't it? With its round towers, so you haven't got any blind spots. Your square towers give you blind spots. And if you look at that tower halfway down on the outside there, you can see the arrow slit just above ground level. So anybody coming up the mound there, they're going to get chopped. But brilliantly, you've got such a deep ditch, and at the bottom, you have a deep water moat. So the actual castle itself, it's protected not just by a ditch but by a deep water moat and all of these round towers, and of course they would have all had battlements on top of it which have been removed over the years. So I'm eager to go inside to have a look at just what kind of drawbridge would they have had here. So follow me. So the way the drawbridge worked here was similar to other castles. It closed down to about here, but there's nothing left of the supports or anything to show us exactly where it went. The rest of it would have been a wooden bridge. Now, in times of being attacked, if the enemy were really threatening, that bridge can be destroyed, dropped down. Then the drawbridge can literally be raised, closed up, but we're missing all of the parts that it used to belong to, you know, where's it all gone? But here, there is just some of the evidence left where the portcullis used to run. In fact, there is the portcullis groove. Down it comes. So the portcullis closed off here. So you have to assume that the drawbridge was hinged up. It wasn't on weights. It must have been literally winched up. And then behind it, you have two enormous put-lugs to be rammed across to lock the door, which must have stood here. So now this is the entrance into the inner bailey. The gatehouse, we have the drawbridge, we have the portcullis, we have a door here, and I've just been looking and I found a little bit more evidence. There's a massive put-lug here, a massive beam that comes across. So there was a second door here. I can't see if there was any portcullis, but I can see there must have been an enormous door. And judging by the size of that hole just there, the beam would have stretched right the way across. and it would have stopped anybody trying to batter it down. Well, for a little time anyhow. But we're going to have a look in the guard room. So we're just inside one of the gatehouse towers. There's not much to see at the bottom, but as you come up, there's some plaster still on the wall. So is this part of the original plaster of the castle? Because you do find it now and again. But this is the remains of a staircase. Nice little spiral staircase. And there's the remains of another one coming down in the other direction. So you've got these very narrow stairways, just wide enough for one person to go up, one person to come down. And then if you look over yonder, you can see there are two fireplaces. So this dark, dismal tower, defensive on the front there, was actually accommodation as well. And to your extreme right, you have your arrow loops. When you think about it and we go around these castles, it's literally like looking at a cross-section of a castle, a cross-section of history. I do love it. I do love coming to see these places. I've been haunting them for 67 years. How about that? Because I was about 3 when I was brought here. So we come out of the gatehouse into this incredible inner bailey. This is all part of the domestic range. Isn't it magnificent? Those walls, remember, they were a lot higher. But then I come round, I pop into the kitchen. But unfortunately, there's not a lot left in here. However, in the next room along, it's brilliant. One of the most important parts of the castle. It's where they made the beer. So what we've got here is a bakery. Look at that for an oven. That's enormous, right? Everybody's bread could be baked in there, and some pies on the top, no doubt. But here you have where they malted the barley. So they would take barley which has been stored and sprouted, they would then dry it, and apparently they would then bake it up. I don't know how they did it, but I do understand they turned it into that most wonderful drink, ale, beer. But next we have a mural tower. Now a mural tower sticks out from the battlements, gives you a flanking view of the walls. And this really does show you how these towers, these round towers, worked. Because if you come and look just through here, that's a perfect example of the offset arrow slit, the ones we saw in the outer bailey. So there's one there, there's one literally opposite. So these are flanking arrow slits shooting along the walls. And then you have this one, which is quite something, this one, because you can shoot with your longbow from here down anybody trying to get across that ditch. But I don't like shooting out of these with a longbow. I'll tell you, the arrows often clatter. This is ideal for your crossbowman, and later on, of course, your handgunner and your musketeer. This is a great example. Now I see why they say that this is the best preserved of the 3 castles. Right, we're going to go into this mural tower, this corner tower, this tower that juts out. Right, now interestingly, I thought this was a modern cut through, but here we have a medieval doorway, and it has the holes here for the big lugs to lock the door in place. Now, I understood that the entranceway was up there, and there was a wooden steps up to it if you wanted to get into the accommodation upstairs. So maybe this is it. This is the soldier's bit. Here are 3 arrow slits, all aiming down into the moat. You can see the big beams that used to go across here to carry the floor upstairs. So that's the beginning of accommodation. So you've got ground, or let's say it's the basement, ground, first, second. So this is a 3-story tower with the battlements on the top. And of course, on the top, you would have had your machicolations as well. The battlements overbuilt with those wooden hoardings all the way around. So this is quite a thing, isn't it? But I wouldn't fancy living up there. You'll notice that there's no windows on this side. Not even arrow slits that I can see. So it would have been dark and dismal to live in that tower when you consider the only light coming through are from the narrow windows on the courtyard side. So let's carry on. Now, sometimes things don't quite make sense. This is the postern gate, the back way out of the castle. It must have been quite smaller than this, but I do understand there was a walkway of some kind over the moat. And what I learned is that this was the original entrance to the castle. But back in the 13th century, when Hubert de Burgh was strengthening White Castle, the whole of the castle defences were turned 180 degrees. And a new gatehouse was built facing onto the outer ward to prevent surprise attacks. Now what they found is these enormous footings. Look how thick these walls are here. This was an early medieval tower apparently, and it was buried. There was other buildings put in its place. So this castle has been built on and built over. It can be a little bit confusing. I'm hoping I'm making a little bit of sense. We're going to go into another tower. This is what's left of the chapel tower. So I should imagine this is all part of the entrance way into this building. Once again, we have a defensive door, a door that can be shut. I reckon this is where the hinges were. There are 3 sets of them. So this is a lockable door. Leads you into the military part of the tower, same as over yonder. So as you come in, you've got the storeroom here, or perhaps the military access, because there's an arrow loop there. And then you can see the ledge where the upstairs floor used to go. So wooden beams underneath, the floor above. There's a window for light as well as an arrow loop. But then there's that piece of stone jutting out. And that's what we call a piscina. That is where the priest would wash his sacred vessels, so I understand. So above us, the chapel, then above that, accommodation. It's interesting, I've just had a question asked, is how come there would be an arrow loop inside the chapel, at this place of worship? First and foremost, the chapel is housed in a defensive tower. So you've got to have access to the arrow slits. They would have given you light anyhow. So where I'm standing now, we're in the constable's quarters. So there's a doorway through here into this room. There's his fireplace for his main room. But there's this bit here. What it actually is a latrine pit. The size of it suggests it was used for the whole garrison rather than for private occupants of the constable's quarters here. Waste fell into the deep shaft. Liquid waste would drain through the pit's non-waterproof walls, leaving solids behind for later disposal, when it would be emptied by the hired labourers called the gong farmer, who would then dry the poop, mix it with soil, and it would be used for fertiliser on the fields. Brilliant. It's great when you find these little things, isn't it? But we go just out through the constable's front door. Tip your hat to the constable. He's an important man, don't forget. And here we have the castle well. It's dark, it's dingy, but apparently there's water at the bottom of it. I don't fancy the idea of drinking that water though. It's a bit close to that latrine pit where the liquid waste could drain through the pit's non-waterproof walls. So there was lots of accommodation in this place. You had the rangers above them, the towers, the constable's accommodation. There would have been apartments above it, same here, and all the way along this range. But this building here was the Great Hall. So this would have gone really high, have its vaulted ceiling. But when they dug out the foundations, they found out, well, actually there was a building here before the other one. If you look, you can see there was originally a smaller, narrower footprint. Then just outside of that, it looks as though the foundations were extended to create a bigger Great Hall. And here at the one end, you'll see the remains of a stone-based hearth, which would help keep the hall warm in the winter months. This would have been where all of the food from over there that was made would have been eaten in here, and a lot of that ale would have been drunk too. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our tour of the three castles here in South Wales: Grosmont, Skenfrith and White Castle. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support our channel any further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link, it's in the description. But for now, bye. See you soon.